Hello, viewers, and thanks for joining us for this special interview. I'm Elvis Bo. My guest today is Dr. Chris Fomunyoh, an expert on democratization in Africa, Senior Associate and Regional Director for Central and West Africa, the National Democratic Institute, which is a non-profit and non-partisan organization working to strengthen democratic institutions worldwide. Dr. Chris Fomunyoh is joining us from Washington, D.C. in the United States of America. He has organized and advised international election observation missions in almost all African countries and holds regular meetings with heads of state and government, ministers, elected officials, and civic leaders. Dr. Christopher Fomunyoh will, in the course of this program, discuss the likely impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on elections and democracy in various African countries, as well as measures which need to be taken to handle the challenges faced. Dr. Christopher Fomunyoh, thanks for joining us on Africanews.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I begin with the first question. Some African countries are likely to postpone elections as they may face challenges made worse by increased costs and unplanned circumstances during the COVID-19 pandemic. How can they handle the situation?
Well, so far, we're seeing three different approaches from African countries. We've seen countries such as Mali and Burundi that went ahead and organized elections in April and May. We have other countries such as Tanzania and Malawi that are still trying to figure out whether to maintain their electoral timelines or not. And then we have a country like Ethiopia, where the issue of the postponement of the elections is being currently debated. So this is definitely a pandemic that would impact the electoral calendar across multiple African countries.
How can we use technology and creativity to bring down costs during elections in Africa? Because some elections risk being cancelled due to insufficient resources.
Sure, there's the question of resources, but there's also the difficulty of respecting some of the measures to curb the further contamination of populations due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so for reasons of social distancing, for example, you can no longer hold massive political rallies because populations will be exposed. And so a lot of communications would have to be done by political parties and candidates using the media and using modern technology. And even citizen organizations that traditionally monitor elections would have to do a lot of their work, including the transmission of their reports, using technology, telephones and mobile phones and computers to transmit information. And so we all are going to be compelled to rely on innovation and new technology to help us cope with our election.
So, Dr. Chris, do we have any reason to be scared that democratic institutions will be weakened in any way due to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, I wouldn't be that scared, but the truth is that democracy and democratic institutions are going to be tested. And in some countries, because political space will be shrinking, some regimes that are not very committed to democracy would use the pretext of the pandemic to try to reinforce the powers of the executive branch of government. But in countries that are committed to democratic governance, I am sure that the leaders, elected officials, political party leaders, and civic leaders would find ways to work with their respective election commissions so that they can be inclusive processes that would have everyone giving their input in how elections and other political processes could be managed through this period of COVID-19. And in fact, those countries may even come out having their democracies strengthened and the resilience of the people being compensated accordingly.
In one of your interventions with Chatham House, you talked about the need for goodwill among African leaders. Can we count on the goodwill of African leaders to promote democracy during this period? And is this an opportunity to make elections more transparent than before?
Sure, certainly. I would say that in the past 2 decades, we've seen a number of African leaders who have really come forward to be proponents of democratic governance and who have made efforts to make sure that political power can change hands through the ballot box and that elections can be organized in a meaningful way that give voice to citizens. So there is a track record that one could be proud of. But at the same time, we also know that we still have some recalcitrant autocratic regimes that make it difficult for citizens to organize and participate in credible polls. And we would use opportunities such as these ones to urge African Democrats, whether they're in civil society organizations or in political parties, to continue to hold their leaders accountable and also appeal to leaders to, to make decisions that can safeguard their places in history, that can safeguard their legacy as people who governed justly and who contributed to making sure that democracy could be strengthened across the African continent.
With an impending economic crisis and the possible rise of unemployment, according to analysts, should we be scared of possible scenarios of unrest across the continent as a result of elections?
Well, you don't want to be a prophet of doom because this global pandemic is affecting not just Africa, but countries across Europe, Asia, North America as well. And many of the economies of these countries are going to be negatively impacted by the pandemic. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some of the social movements that we now see in the United States, in parts of Europe, also be felt in Africa. But the test is going to be to see how African governments can take measures to soften the economic blow of the pandemic and how they can also work with other stakeholders to make sure that there's economic relief for the companies that will create jobs, for the private sector that will create jobs, that young people still find opportunities in the post-COVID period, and that countries can be stabilized in a way that would allow them to bounce back both economically and politically as well.
Prof, let me take you to a news making event before we draw our conclusions because we are gradually getting to the end of our program. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, a high-profile graft case involving President Felix Tshisekedi's chief of staff has been evolving. What is the impact of anti-graft drives like this on good governance on the continent?
Well, as you rightly indicated, the case in the Democratic Republic of Congo is still ongoing. It's a very high-profile case. I couldn't comment on it because the investigations are still ongoing and the trial is still ongoing. But it's a case that we're monitoring very closely alongside the Congolese people who want to be able to determine whether this is an honest effort to curb corruption, which tends to impact very negatively on the well-being of citizens. And I'm sure that if justice prevails and the investigations are conducted in a very transparent manner, that at the end of the day, it will send a very strong message, not just to Congolese, but to other office holders across the continent, that the judiciary has a role to play and that corruption has a negative impact on the well-being of our economies and our countries.
We want to thank you for accepting our invitation, for accepting to talk to Africa News, Doctor.
Thank you very well. Thank you very much. Stay safe and be well.
Viewers, thanks for watching. Keep watching Africa News. Follow us on our social networks and get more on africanews.com.